This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. This morning, and actually if you're listening to this podcast, it might not be the morning, it might be the evening. Whichever way it is, this is Respectonomics, and it's coming to you courtesy of Sarah Benton, who's my co-host, and Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, which is who I am. And we are speaking, sharing ideas this morning on behalf of Respectonomics. And before we get to the specific subject, I want to remind all of us what the purpose of Respectonomics is. In fact, we have come out with a new word. Our organization now no longer talks about our purpose or our mission. We talk about our compass. And it's worth knowing that we now own a domain called The Living Compass, which will at some point be posted in the normal manner. But in the meantime, let's just rehearse with one another the whole intent, the compass of Respectonomics. And the first one is to restore the dignity of the human being in all respects of how we dignify one another. And secondly, our business is to honor other people's freedom of choice. If we put those two on the table, we have a much better way of harmonizing ourselves one to another. And while that may sound like a moral decision, it's also not only moral, but it's also very effective when it comes to economics, politics, living generally, family, unity, anything you want. When we start respecting, dignifying the other human being and also honoring other people's freedom of choice, we've got a starting gate that makes a lot of sense.
Excellent. Good morning. Or as you say, good afternoon or good evening.
Yeah, whatever it is. That's right. I mean, do you want to comment on the compass? It was actually your idea, and we better get this out on air so everybody knows Sarah came up with the word compass.
Oh, no. I didn't
Jeremy competed with the Living Compass. Anyway, organization.
Well, I think that flowed from the compass.
Exactly, it did. Exactly.
Which is another fabulous term that you came together with from the compass. I think really when we were talking about, like you say, replacing that word, our purpose or our mission or our vision, we were really looking for a word that would, I was going to say encompass, but that would be silly. But we were really looking for a word that kind of gathered everything together and made sense. And I think when we really thought about the term or the word compass, we felt that it covered everything from direction to knowing where you're at in order to know where you're going. And at the same time, I think if you're looking for guidance or assistance or looking to arenas or areas in your life or in your work life as a leader or as an employee where there may be some challenge with direction or some gaps, that when you think about a compass as well, when you're lost or you're not sure which way to go, you're looking at your compass. So I think the value in us collaboratively, it was a group chat, coming up with the concept of compass versus purpose or vision was fantastic, because I think it holds a multitude of positive facets for us.
Yeah, and I think the fascinating thing about using a compass is, in and of itself, it does not give you the answer. But when you A, use it, B, recognize where you are, which you just said. But thirdly, the other thing is it gives us the ability to point in a direction where we want to go, which at one level seems, I would say, obvious. Everybody sort of wants to wake up in the morning thinking about where they're going. But you can't use a compass on its own. You need a map to sort of bring the coordinates together and so on. Right. And I think everybody needs to have that map. The organization should have a map. They call it all kinds of things. They call it their strategies and tactics and all these big words. Politicians do the same thing. We, at our own individual level, we have our own maps. But I think we need to be, when you use the word collaborative, it's also the concept of collaborating the compass with the map. So we not only look at the compass to sort of see where we are and so on, but we use the map to help us to find out what else is beyond our immediate orbit.
Well, and the compass is a tool or a resource, and ideally, Respectonomics, we would like to be viewed as your tool or your resource to
Yes.
help guide you.
To help guide.
Yeah.
I think that's an enormous point. There's no sense of what you'd call pontificating. There's no sense of we've got all the answers. I think the person holding the compass is the one who holds the answer,
Mm-hmm.
because they will know that is the direction they want to go in. One little giggle for all of us is that a compass has 360 points around the circumference, which means that's mathematics, school time math. Do you remember your school time
I
geometry?
do remember my math. Yes.
And your algebra?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. Okay. But the key is, if there are 360 points on the compass, that means we've got 360 podcasts to make. Because each.
Okay.
Mhm. So it's
Challenge accepted.
exactly. And it just, but in itself, although it's a sort of sounds like a giggle, truth of the matter is it explains the total scope. The compass is an enormous scoping mechanism. Respectonomics is an enormous scoping mechanism. So.
Yes.
So the subject today, the compass today, as we will call the compass, each episode won't be called an episode, it'll be called a compass. And the
Okay.
compass point today is hold the door.
I like this.
Hold
And
the door.
what do you mean, Jeremy, by hold the door?
Well, tonight we have in our studio Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm going to take you back a little bit before in fact, you and I had even met. And that is the history to Respectonomics started with, I mean, I won't go through all the sort of the retirement issues and so on, but the thing that really brought it to a head was I decided it was time to write about manners. And manners is a word that is sort of flipped around easily, but
Mhm.
manners, in fact, is the plural of manner. I know that sounds very, grammatical,
Right.
but the key is the manners reflect the manner in which we treat other people. So manners aren't a sort of one of those lovely Victorian ideas of, whether you hold your sword in your left side or your right side. It's the manner in which we treat other people.
Mm-hmm.
Holding the door is something so fundamental. You go into a shopping mall, you go into the grocery store, whatever it is, whatever point you can imagine where there's people around you and there's a door,
Mm-hmm.
we have an opportunity to hold the door for somebody else. And that's what I think we should be talking about this morning. How do we hold the door for somebody else? How does the chief executive officer hold the door for the person who has just arrived at work, through a snowstorm or whatever it might be, had a terrible drive in? We need to be able to open the door for other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of the crux of the discussion.
I love it because it's logistically hold the door, but also it can be applied to, like you say, we always talk about family, we talk about political, we talk about corporate, we talk about community, and hold the door can have a myriad of support.
Yeah.
In all of those realms, right? It can be applied to that in different contexts other than simply hold the door.
Well, it's true. And I think the fascinating thing is if you said to most people, we need to do something about manners today, and you've heard that. I have a sneaky suspicion your mother might have said it to you once in your life, something about manners.
Well, I have excellent manners.
No. They became it. You have to go back to the origin of species.
Yeah.
But I mean, all of us have had some kind of lecture or pointy finger on
Yeah.
that. And I think one of the difficulties is when somebody says you need to improve your manners. I mean, you heard that line, and we say it easily. The line that's very contiguous to that is the one that says there's no respect these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That kind of comment, and they've got a certain sort of cocktail conversation to them, and they really don't go anywhere. Holding the door is very specific. It's physical. It's intentional. It's of the moment, it's spontaneous, if you will, and it's an opportunity to engage with another human being. Because
Absolutely.
we're living in a world of, what would you call it, isolation and people being what you might call exiled or being abandoned and all those big words. But the truth of the matter is we need each other. And
It's
holding,
also having awareness outside of yourself.
absolutely.
Recognize you need to hold the
Yeah.
door. Or would you
Yeah.
like to hold the door?
Yeah. And it's a fascinating exercise because if you go into Walmart, for example, where you've got it could be a drugstore, it doesn't matter, but where you've got a continuing flow of people, it's fascinating to go in at the door, put your hand on the handle, pull it open. Now, some are electric, so you're sort of, what you'd say, mechanical, so you don't need to do that. But you hold the door, and it's fascinating that you instinctively then, reflexively, you turn around to see if there's somebody behind you.
Mm,
That to me is the absolute starting gate of good manners. Is there somebody behind me who wants to go through the same door that I'm going through? And it's a very physical act, as we've said, but it's also one that psychologically, even spiritually, now that sounds a little heavy, but what I'm getting at is when you accommodate somebody else, you are meeting them not only bodily, by definition, holding the door so the body can come through. You're holding the door so that you can have an engagement of mind, and you're also allowing them into your space. That is where the soul speaks to the soul. I mean, we can all say, well, that doesn't happen. Yes, it does. It's one of the most powerful connecting points between human beings is when soul speaks to soul. It's one of the most exciting moments.
right.
Ask me, ask any loving young couple, and they talk about my soul speaks to their soul. And it's
It's
beautiful.
interesting to also be it is beautiful. It's also interesting to be very aware that there are different reactions from individuals when that door is held open.
Let's talk about that
Hmm.
because I can hear the mothers of the world ganging up now. Oh, actually, you're a mother, so you can gang up on me on this one.
No ganging up.
All right, no ganging up. But when you hold the door open for somebody else, it's always nice when that individual turns around and says, thank you.
Receptive.
It's receptive. And at the same time, and this is where the mothers will join forces, it's also incumbent on me when somebody holds the door that I say thank you.
Yes.
And my mother, we're talking about mothers, my mother had an interesting line. I used to say, and I know this sounds very old fashioned, but I always stand up when a lady comes into the room. I always do. So, I mean, after the third time, I might not. But when somebody comes into my space, a lady comes into my space, I always stand up. And I said this to my mother one day, just conversationally, and she made an interesting comment. Remember, this is the lady talking, the woman
Yes.
talking, who said, she said, actually, she said, I stand up when anybody comes into the room. In other
Mm.
words, there's no gender discrimination. There's no distinction between, the high, the low, the rich and the poor. That's got nothing to do with it. It's that respect for the human being.
It's
And
about all that are welcome through the
yes,
door.
absolutely. And I think that the concept of, we just talk about standing up, somebody coming into the room, but the one that is probably more conversational, more realistic, it's going to happen many times during the daytime, that I can hold the door for somebody else. I think that's in and of itself important. Now, you mentioned a moment ago, Sarah, and I'd love to get you to expand on this. I
Mhm.
hold the door for somebody
Yes.
and they don't say thank you. Well, that's a shame, but let's let that one go. Just let
Yeah.
it go. The one that I want to address is the one that turns around and says, excuse me, I can hold the door for myself. Thank you.
Yes.
And
Certainly not
that's
when
over to you. That's for you to talk about.
wow. Certainly not the response I think people are thinking about or hoping for, when they're holding the door. And let's face it, we all have a choice in terms of holding open the door. So it is, are you attached to the outcome of holding the door, or are you doing it because that's your nature? That's something that you'd like to do. I of course, you would like somebody to say thank you, and I can say from experience that my children, are obviously have great manners. I'm going to say obviously. So yes, my children obviously have great manners, and obviously we're speaking about a generation
Right.
gap as well. So that's interesting to bring to the table as well.
Right.
Different generations have different thought processes in terms of how they were raised, right? However, I always find it really interesting in those cases where it's been intentional to hold the door open for someone, and that particular response is either not a thank you or an acknowledgement,
Mhm.
that my children will make a comment in terms of, wow, they're surprised or they're taken aback or they don't appreciate the lack of response or acknowledgement,
Well, it's
right?
very abrasive, isn't it? When you think you've done
Well, if
something.
you think you're doing something
Yeah.
nice or thoughtful, again, and you're not doing it looking for something in return, you're doing it because you're mindful of it or you're aware and you feel it's a nice thing to do. But I think it's very challenging or it can impact you when somebody has a negative response to it.
Well, let's talk about this negative response because, as you say, your children and certainly my children, they get very affronted when they don't hear a straightforward thank you, or but
Right.
it doesn't
Or a nod or a
a nod
smile
or a
or
smile
something.
or you know
Yeah.
or, something that connects,
Yes.
and they get very annoyed with that kind of thing. So I think
Yes.
we're all on the same page. What's interesting is take the individual who says, I don't need you to hold the door for me, that
Mhm.
pushback, whatever you want to call it. And I think that what you see in that is an incredible degree of arrogance, a degree of meism. I'm on my own. I don't need anybody else. And
Mhm.
I'm not going to pontificate on that as much
Right.
as when we feel that way, which we all do from time to time, leave me alone, I can manage, blah, blah, blah. When we have that feeling, that is when we should trigger ourselves to saying, I'm going to go out and hold the door for somebody else. Use
Yes, and
the trigger point.
I agree with that. And something that the thought process that I like as well, or something similar comes up. So we'll use this example is I'll say to them as well, or to others, you never know what's going on in that individual's life at that time that may be impeding or impacting or um, challenging them in terms of how they may be reacting to things in that particular moment or throughout their day. You never know what's going on in that individual's life. So if you can do your best to come at it from a place of compassion and empathy and think
Mm,
that's too bad that that person's having that kind of day,
right,
to try and kind of take that tone, and like you say, then move on and share that with somebody
right.
else as well, right?
And I want to take up you on your comment about you don't know where people are coming from.
Mhm.
I believe this story is probably apocryphal. I don't know if it's literally true. But the way it was told to me was the train that is going out of New York City, going out to the suburbs. And there was a fellow with his two children in the compartment,
Mhm.
and the children were behaving extremely badly. They were racing up and down the aisleway and grabbing themselves, the usual
Right.
stuff. And the father was sitting there with an absolute blank look on in his face, not paying any attention to the children at all. Eventually, one of the co-passengers nudged him and said, "Would you mind controlling," or whatever he would have said, you know, quieting your children down a bit or something. The man shakes his head and says, "I'm so sorry," he said. "We've just come back from burying their mother."
Mm.
So, in other words, huge translation of what was going on. And I
Right.
think opening the door is a way of saying, not only do I go and open the door as a physical act of doing something for somebody else, it's elemental, it's basic, it's right at the beginning of the scale. So we
Yeah.
start with opening the door for other people. And your comment is, you don't know what that door means to that other person. In
Right.
other words, they're coming out of a world that may be an absolute shambles. They may be in a terrible place
You
of
don't know what elicited that reaction or
exactly,
that state of
exactly.
being or that type of response, right?
Yeah. But we owe it to ourselves. I mean, one of the things about respectonomics is that as much as, I mean, it's an incredibly reciprocal approach. It says
Mhm.
that these are the things that people should be doing for me, but it is also incumbent on me. It's a necessity for me
Yes.
to look at what can I do for you. And my first starting gate is almost to the point of oversimplifying our manners and life and so on. But our starting gate is to hold the door for somebody.
Mhm.
Just do it. And then recognizing what you're talking about, which is when that person comes through the door, who knows what they've come through? The door is just one part of their journey that morning, but it might be a place of great enjoyment. They may have had a wonderful time and they're coming through the door and you hold it and they go, wow, thank you.
I also like how the compass comes into, play from an analogy from that vantage point as well, where you were talking about, when you're doing for someone and then somebody's responding and
Mm,
we've talked about this from a work or an organization
right,
perspective, right?
right.
Where leaders can be engaged and contribute to things that may be challenging in the workplace or gaps. But there's also a responsibility on the employees as well to also
Right.
be present, be contributing, what have you. So it's a reciprocal relationship. So I always think of that as as a circle. It's everything is connected. And so if you think about your 360 points, one point is going to affect the next point that would affect the
Exactly.
next. So it's cyclical in that nature. And so that's what I really like about the compass and respectonomics. It's about reciprocity as well, right?
Well, the thing I love about the compass is also it's made up of a needle, the middle of which is supported by, I believe it's called the fulcrum.
Mm.
Sound right?
I
Physics, physics,
this one's
physics,
over to
physics.
you.
Well, we'll go over to somebody else on that one, but it
It's
does
the
have a,
foundation.
it's a center point and it's the fulcrum that balances the needle. Have you noticed the needle has a pointy end and another pointy end? In
Mhm.
other words, the needle depends on having both ends operating. If
Right.
you took off one of the ends of that compass, the compass wouldn't actually work.
Right.
But the concept of reciprocity is built into this concept of the reality of the compass. There's a north,
Mhm.
there's a south, there's a you and there's a me, and we need to come together. See,
Yes.
one of the problems in the world today is, and I'm not going off at a tangent, I'm making I think, a profound comment, in, and that is the world today. We've talked and talked and talked about how messed up it is and so on, and how angry people are and so on. And I think one of the pieces you could extract from the whole picture, tapestry, is that you've got the left duking it out with the right. You can define the left whichever way you want and the right whichever way you want.
Mhm.
But you've
There's
got
side
they're two sides. Now,
divided.
they're divided. Now, when you get those two sides that are actually cannot see each other even, opening the door is a profound way to start rebuilding relationships.
Yeah.
Just opening the door. It doesn't,
Communication.
yeah, but I
Connect.
don't have to agree with you.
Absolutely not.
As a matter of fact, I'd like our listeners to know that you and I don't agree on
Correct.
things.
It's the way in which you deliver
Yeah,
that disagreements and the way that we're open to dialogue and conversation.
absolutely. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think the first thing is to understand that with the compass, with this concept of opening the door, all we're trying to do is to initiate communication, to bring
Yes.
the other person into our lives and to allow our lives to be in that person's life. Opening
Right.
the door has a certain vulnerability to it, funnily enough, because you're actually holding the door for somebody else unsolicitedly. They
Right.
never asked you to do it. So you're going into their space and you're taking the risk in a sense of you're making yourself vulnerable. It's in that vulnerability that people are most attracted to us. If I,
Yes.
if you and I start saying we are so clever, the world will turn us off. When we start saying that we are in a business that is where all we're beginning to realize is how little we know and how much more we want to know. Once we identify the vulnerability, the fallibility of ourselves, the more attractive the message becomes. And that's
Yes.
true right the way through all organizations.
Absolutely.
Vulnerability is a wonderful, wonderful tool. I remember once the head of the of a financial organization. And I think I've mentioned this before, but he screwed up at a shareholders meeting. He really did. He said absolutely the wrong things. Well, about a week or two later, he was at some sort of branch management meeting with all the branch managers there. And you could see the arms, you know how you get the arms crossed. And so what are
Yeah.
you going to tell us after what you did? And his brilliant opening line was, well, after I screwed up at the shareholders meeting, well, as soon as he did that, everybody was on side.
Relaxed
Yeah,
because they recognize that the
yeah,
individual is vulnerable
yeah, yeah.
and
And so,
aware. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's so, in other words, opening the door is part of letting ourselves be vulnerable. And
Hmm.
it's the fascinating thing about opening the door is there are two parts to opening a door that we need to think about. One of
Yeah.
them is, and I'm going to talk organizationally, but I could be talking politically, I could be talking corporately. I think I could be talking the family, actually. I don't think it matters where there's a unit of people that have come together,
Applicable to all.
applicable to all. But what I find fascinating is we do this with our children. You've done a lot of things with your children where you're not sure they're going to enjoy learning to play the piano. You're not sure they're going to want to learn to ski. You're not even sure if they want to play football. Football.
Mm, yes.
I think I've
Wrong
lost
kind
it.
of football. Wrong kind of football.
Yeah. Well, I know, and we need to have a chat about that. But anyway, no, but the thing is, though, what you did was all your life of parenting, raising your children, was designed around about the idea of opening doors for them,
Yes. Opportunities.
giving
Yes.
them the opportunities. But opening the door was very, very central to, hey, take a look at this. You'd open the door.
Yeah. Yes.
And the reason you did it was partly because it's there to be done, and that's fine. But the biggest reason I think we show the new doors to other people is
Hmm.
them to be able to explore their own potential.
Yes. Yes.
How often do you remember that one when your mother would say to you, or your father would say to you, taste this, and you would say, I don't like it, before you even tested it?
Yes.
Okay. Then they shove this spoonful of turnips or something ghastly at you, and you took a bite of it, and actually you liked it. Now, sometimes you didn't, and that's fine. That's fine, by
Yeah.
the way. But the opportunity to like something is
Hmm.
very, very
Is
important.
available.
Yeah. So what it comes to is that we need to look at opening the door as another way of opening the doors of potential to other people, not
Yeah.
so much as saying this is what you can do, as much as this is what you're capable of doing.
Yes. Or just open the idea of open to exploration.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I mean, just opening, well, and exploration is a very clever word because
Mm.
that brings us back to compass and maps.
Right.
So we're into the business of exploring, we're into the business of opening the doors. And opening the door for another human being is a wonderful, wonderful gift to give anybody. And I think this opening the door business is not only good manners, but I think it's also a chance to release people's potential and to
Yes.
release people from that sense of, you know, how people feel suffocated, overwhelmed these days.
Yes.
How they just don't feel like they can get out from underneath it all.
Yes.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, opening the door is kind of a nice way of mutually doing it. Where you open the door for somebody else, fills you up. But then also when somebody opens the door for you, that is in itself an extraordinary gift and brings out stuff that, we didn't even know we had in us.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm going to take a little bit of a spur here.
Okay.
This is for you to comment on from the depths of your being.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is, if you'd asked me about Respectonomics 4 years ago, my eyes would have glazed over. I
Hmm.
really would have found myself saying something along the lines of, what are you talking about?
Okay.
But if the door was opened, as indeed it was for me, what it does is it releases the potential and the creativity. And
Agreed.
I want to know how you feel about that, because I think our listeners need to know that you and I wouldn't want to say we stumbled into this. That's a little bit disorganized.
Yeah. I think it was it was sort of a timing thing, if you will, right? I think there was certainly, as people may or may not be aware, but my uncle is sort of the connecting
He was the connecting,
he was the
absolutely.
connecting point. And so certainly there was dialogue around, him sharing about you and Respectonomics,
Mhm.
and he also shared with you in terms of about myself, in terms of what my background is, and things that I was doing or working with him, coaching with him. And so, although the timing wasn't right at that time, interesting enough, the opportunity or the door
The door.
was opened,
Mhm.
back in the fall, and provided an opportunity to explore something that was, in the background, and we may not have come to being connected on. So that door being opened, has allowed to explore opportunities and conversation and dialogue, and how to partake in Respectonomics.
Well, I think the whole idea of partaking in something is that whole concept of opening the door for somebody else.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the physicality of doing it, I'm overemphasizing this, but the physicality of opening the door for somebody else it's almost like a jolt or a reminder or a nudge better, that we're going to open the door for somebody else in terms of their potential, in terms of
Right.
what they can do. And it might even be, by the way, when we talk about opening the door, we're very quick to say, oh, but you should say thank you. There's a
Mhm.
lot of things that happen in our lives for which we go through without saying thank you.
Yes.
And now and again, a little thank you, and I say little, it's big, but saying thank you for something that didn't have a specific, spontaneous, open door kind of action. There
Mhm.
are times when literally calling up somebody and saying, I want to thank you.
It
20
has
years ago,
power.
what's this?
It has such power and
Yeah,
impact.
it does. And people
Yeah.
love to be thanked, not in a gratuitous way. You're not doing this. I got a note recently from some business organization which said something like, thank you for your business or something. They didn't mean it.
Right.
It was a ridiculous statement.
Right.
It was illogical to the rest of the point of what was going on. So the thank you has to be sincere, just like opening the door for somebody. You don't,
Right.
if you think of it, you don't go and open the door when there's nobody there.
Fair.
That's not terribly cool thing to do because you let the cold in or you let the heat out or whatever it is you're doing. So holding the door open when somebody is there is the spontaneous necessity of collaborating, of helping another human being.
So what are the next steps then in terms of resetting the compass, checking calibration?
I think one of your words, the word you use a great deal in both your life, but also from your HR background, is you use the word awareness.
Mm,
And I think it's almost like we're giving each other marching orders, and I see each other giving ourselves the opportunity to say to someone else, be aware of what is going on around you. So when you see somebody going towards a door with parcels, how much time does it take to turn around and go and open the door so the individual can go through? And if that's true in the physical world, it must be true in the psychological world, the spiritual world, the mental world, social world, whatever world you want to refer to.
mhm.
But it's a trigger point to doing something for somebody else. So number one is being the awareness. The other thing is there are times we talk about holding the door open. It is also fair to say that there are times when we have to hold the door shut. And
Fair.
it sounds ugly and it sounds confrontational. But there are things that can come into our lives that loosely we'll say are toxic. And
Mhm.
just using that as a one word, one line. What we therefore need to do is to be able to say to ourselves, I am closing the door on that.
Yes.
If I'm going to close the door on a toxic, whatever that might mean or be, I also need to have the ability to close the door on the unpleasantries in my previous life. Because all of us have had stuff in our lives that we
Right.
regret, wish it never happened, and all that good stuff. Closing the door on those is very helpful. I'm not saying it's easy to do,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very difficult to do and probably involves a combination of therapy and time and all kinds of things. But it does mean we need, at least intentionally, we need to think about putting those things behind us. But I want
Yes.
to talk about the pains and the agonies of the past because we've all been through pains and agonies of the past. After all, I came through a British upbringing. What could be more painful than that? But seriously, when you think about all of the things that have happened to us one way or the other, it is interesting that some of the greatest work that has been done by people who have come out of terrible pain or terrible grief or some unimaginable
Yes.
problem. This morning I was hearing about a couple from Ukraine who are in London, Ontario, and they think that Canadian coffee is the craps.
I've
They
heard that
like, and
before.
and they're not probably wrong. But in the meantime, they've decided that the best thing to do is to have good Ukrainian coffee. So that's what they're doing. So out of a place of terrible pain and desolation, and I mean, I don't think any of us can really use the right words to describe
Yeah.
life in Ukraine. But
Correct.
out of that, look what's coming. A new industry, new faces, new gathering spots, new
Mm-hmm.
flavors, new.
There can be growth and discomfort and challenge.
Exactly. So I don't, I'm not being dismissive of the pains. I'm talking
Absolutely.
about them. They can be stepping stones. They can be the very articles that in fact release our creativity. But
And
I'm not,
not everybody will view challenges or pain or difficulty in terms of equating it to, well, what's the good that came out of that? And so that's fair to recognize that. However, there are times for everybody, it's individualistic to everybody on whether or not they can view those challenges or those difficult times as maybe on the backside of things as opportunities, right?
no, and I'm not actually, that awful line about, when you hear somebody gets fired from their job and somebody smugly says, oh, that means there's another door opening. I mean,
Yes.
I think clinically that's probably true. In good taste, I think it's
Yes.
a appalling
It
statement.
may not be reasonable at that time.
And
Sometimes timing is key. Yes.
exactly. I do want to make the issue that out of the call it pain, out of the pain does come creativity.
Mhm.
And it, in a way, it allows us to explore this new open door, the open door in your life or my life that can open doors to doing things differently, doing things better, things for the prosperity of the human being.
Exploration.
Yeah. Now, there's one thing I want to touch on. We've talked about opening the door, holding the door, thanking people, talking about the potential, talking about opening the doors for people to see their potential. We do all of those things, and I mean, they are admirable. It's true. I just want to put one thought that crossed my mind, I guess, and that is in the world of immigration, and
Mhm.
I can talk to that subject authentically because I am an immigrant.
Mhm.
And Canada
Yes.
had,
Okay.
I thought to myself this morning, I thought, Canada's done an incredible amount for me. It really has. It's relieved, it's refreshed, it's restored, it's done incredible things for me. Except for one thing. It hasn't given me a Canadian accent. And that's
No, it does not.
and that's Canada's fault. That's what I say.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah. I can't actually figure it out. I came to Canada on my own, literally, no family, nothing. Came when I was 17 years old. So now we're talking, roughly speaking, 60 years later.
I was gonna say 20 years later.
Very, very, very amusing. French for amusing.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. As she holds the door open. But it's interesting that my accent hasn't really gone.
Yes.
In fact, what I've noticed is when I go back to England, I don't go very often, but if I am in England, I notice my accent can get horribly thick very quickly, which I don't understand.
Well, you're submersed back into that environment, right?
Yeah, maybe that's why I don't
I
go.
mean, I used to have one when I was younger until I started going to school, and then as I went to school, I
Oh,
started to
right.
lose. But I
Yeah.
think if I was I've gone back and forth to England several times, and
Right.
I do find it would be quite easy to pick it up
Mhm.
once you're back in that
Right.
environment, right?
But as an immigrant, I want to make a comment. I remember in June of 1968 or July of 68, and I was sitting in the immigration office in Montreal and filled in all the documents and so on. And then he looked at all the papers. He said, "Yep, everything's in all good order. You're in," or something,
Right.
whatever it is. This was the fascinating part. Here I am again, 60 years later. He put out his hand and said, "Welcome to Canada."
I'm not sure that would happen today.
No, but what a classy thing to say.
Yes.
Think of what, I mean,
Right.
here I am talking about it even. And I remember it specifically. I can remember the desk. I can remember his demeanor. I wish I knew his name, but the point is that,
The impact of that one.
yeah, that one thank you.
Mhm.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is partly to express what that thank you meant, what the importance of Canada has been to me. It's a card I play very easily. But the thing I also want to say is this. We talk about immigration today almost in abstract terms. We talk about it as being a number that's whatever. And you hear these great declarations coming from the government saying that we're going to increase and decrease and this, that, and the other. And you get activists
Mhm.
saying we should be doing this, that, and the other, and all of that. So it's a big picture. But I want to contest myself with something that immigrant comes to my door, and I'm Canada, and I'm holding that door, and I take the door handle and I say, "No, you can't come in," and I close
Mhm.
the door. That is an incredible indictment. It's almost a violation. And I know everybody will join and I'll do the same and talk about immigration needs to be coordinated with blah, 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 and housing and schools and hospitals and all that, of course.
Mhm.
But I'm talking now about a very individual act of my standing at the door and saying, "You can't come in." I'm not sure where I stand on that morally. But I
Mhm.
do know where I stand on it morally. I shouldn't say that. I know where I stand morally on that, and I think it's wrong.
Right, right.
Do we rest our case, or do you have some other things you want to ask about?
That could open up and explore a whole
Mm,
other conversation or dialogue. So I think today,
yeah.
excellent conversation. Really enjoyed it, and I really love how the compass applies to respectonomics and how we're incorporating that into the process.
And I hope everybody will get their compass out and find out whose door can they open today.
I'm sure there's an app on your phone that you could find a compass if you don't have one.
Well, I tell you one thing.
There's a compass available everywhere is the
Yeah.
point,
And do you
right?
want to know? You know how you love Latin origins?
Oh, yes.
Are you ready?
Ready.
Compass comes from co, which means together. That's fine.
Yes.
But the passus is actually what the Romans used to describe a step, and 1,000 passus was a mile. And the key behind the compass is what steps are you taking?
I love it.
So it's totally honest. And the step we're talking about today is to hold the door.
Absolutely love it.
We rest our case.
We rest our case.
We rest our case.